Shall we get started?
Yeah.
Super. Okay, good morning, everyone. We hope everyone's keeping well. Okay, can everyone see okay? Yeah.
Morning, guys. How are you doing?
Morning. So first of all, just thank everyone for coming. The response to this has been phenomenal. So we're a little bit overwhelmed with the uptake. As I mentioned, there's over 55 universities represented. We've over 100 people registered. So I think it's a testament to how important community is and the recognition that, you know, the impact that community can have in terms of conversion, student experience, well-being, and that's great. And it's clearly something that people value and understand. And so hopefully in today's session, you can take something really practical away. So let's kick on. Just a few housekeeping. Dan is, I think, manning the chats. So yeah, he's looking after the, so if there are any questions as we progress, jump in. We want to keep it as informal, as interactive as we possibly can. So Dan will be posting in the chats and responding to queries, and there'll be opportunities as well to kind of field those questions at the end. From the previous session we did, people got a lot of value from being connected with others. So there's a breakout session. So I'll actually jump straight into the the order of play today. So a quick introduction to us, to CampusConnect. We have a lot of our partners around here, so you'll know us. But for those who don't, we'll introduce ourselves and explain what we do and the kind of communities that we support. We're just going to look a bit of sort of back. We covered this in a previous workshop, but just to understand what we mean by applicant communities. I think it's important that everyone's on the same page. Applicant or an offer holder community. What is the goal, the purpose? Why do we have them? We're going to then sort of pose the question, you know, to consider how your ambassadors, how effective are your ambassadors at the moment as community builders. We want to challenge really the thought of, you know, the kind of traditional ambassador as a kind of a semi-staff answering questions, and to look sort of beyond that and look at kind of higher level activity that we can engage ambassadors in that generates community for incoming students. We'll have a breakout task. We've given 12 minutes because I think the last one was a little bit short. So it usually takes a few minutes for people to kind of get into the room. So you'll have 10 minutes then to interact with other people across the sector and to really find out what people are doing with their ambassadors, how they're being implemented, what kind of activities they're doing that helps community. And we hope that there'll be, when we all come back together, we hope that there'll be some interesting ideas as well there. And then myself and Adele are going to look at 5 practical examples that you can apply today. So 5 things that you can get your ambassadors to do that will help generate community and help students sort of in that sense of belonging and that that important that in that sort of pre-enrollment space, what you can get them doing to help students integrate and become more active members of your community. And then at the end we'll have a Q&A. So there's a bit in it, but we hope that it's nice and interactive and it's light. It's not too heavy in terms of content, but lots of opportunities for you to connect and so on. So without further ado, we'll kick on to. So we are CampusConnect. CampusConnect is, you're familiar obviously with Unibuddy and TAP. We're a little bit different in that what we do is we develop an actual bespoke, custom bespoke community for each of the institutions that we work with. So the teams that we work with, we develop a bespoke branded community environment for incoming students. The value of that, it means that it is very, very closely mapped to your specific context. So the students can engage around the specific programs, accommodation options, interest clubs and societies, and so on and so forth. So a fully tailored and branded community for incoming students. And we handle, for the teams we work with, we have thousands of applicants each cycle across postgrad, undergrad, international. The value, institutional sort of return on this particular resource is each cycle we deliver, in excess of 70% conversion. So as a pathway to university, it delivers on conversion, progression, and the student experience is exceptional. And that's something that so it's a very boutique, very high touch community service for our incoming students. Now, Dan in the chat, just from the previous session, I know folk were looking for kind of a more tailored walkthrough. So if you're interested in a kind of a demo or a look at some of the community projects, there's a link in the chat where you can schedule something outside of this. And there's also a link there to some case studies to see some of the examples and some of the communities that we've built at Staffordshire University, Liverpool, John Moores, who we've been working with for quite a while and have very established community programs. So that's in there. Also, I'd like to introduce Adele, who is our community manager, which is a really important part of our service. Adele works very closely with each of the teams. These communities, in some cases, have over 200 peer groups and process groups and so on. So we do have this kind of management service where we work very closely with the teams, developing new community groups, running ambassador training programs, supporting ambassadors, and bringing in wider university teams into the communities so the communities are successful. And we'll walk through that in a bit of detail. So I think Dan's also got a link to what that community service looks like. So that is CampusConnect. That's us. Moving on. So what do we mean by a community, by an applicant or an offer holder community? Now, it's fairly self-explanatory. We're talking about an incoming cohort of students. Can be thousands of students. They can be across, as I mentioned, PG, international, and home undergrad. Universities typically host these communities across different social channels, platforms, so Facebook, WhatsApp, Discord, Slack. People try different things, and then, or more custom communities like a CampusConnect environment. The goal of the community is to help these students integrate, to help them find connections, find belonging, begin to sort of feel part of the university. It's worth noting that these communities are often the first kind of real interaction that these students would have with the university. Prior to this, there's probably been a lot of sort of Q&A type or interaction on email and so on. So it's kind of the first meaningful engagement that the student will have. Now, these communities are gated because we don't want to allow anybody in. We want to, it's an exclusive home for your incoming students. So you want to make it feel that way. So they're getting an exclusive invitation to join. And once they're in there, we've got to make them feel welcome, make them feel like they're part of the wider institution. We often say at this point that when a student is in this kind of conversion phase or they're considering options, it's often the community that makes a difference, that the students will choose the community that they want to belong to. So those initial connections and those people that they meet are critical in terms of their ultimate progression. So it's a missed opportunity if universities are signposting students into a disassociated, generic kind of community space and hoping that they possibly find connections and warmth. What we recommend is a much more guided approach, structuring your community, making sure that the students can find the right connections, the right support in this very, very critical period. And it has such a bearing on, obviously, conversion, progression, student experience, and so on. So in terms of participation in community, if we go from the left, we have a prospective student, an applicant, or an offer holder who is unaware that this community exists. So what we're doing is we're inviting them to join. Now, this participation curve maps, their engagement over time. Now, what we try to do as community builders is to move applicants or offer holders along this curve so they become more engaged members. And there's lots of different types of activities that they're aware, they perhaps join. Typically, they become very passive members. And if you have large Facebook groups, you know what this is like, where there's one or two people shouting, but the vast majority are passive. But we want them to become more active, more engaged members of the community. So there's different types of activities that we encourage. Now, your ambassadors can support this kind of engagement. Your ambassadors can help these students to integrate by prompting and cueing, and we'll look at it in detail, some of the ideas, but to move them along this curve and to move them from a passive member to a more active, to somebody who is engaged, has agency, and is actually invested in the community at the very top end of the scale. So moving people along the curve is key, and mapping that over time. So the question that we pose is, how effective currently are your ambassadors as community builders? And we want to sort of make a distinction here. There is this traditional sort of notion of an ambassador as this kind of semi-staff there to answer questions. So with an information gap, so a prospective student comes in, they ask a question, there's this kind of utility where they want some practical advice, and that's obviously important, and it's about, but in terms of level of activity, that's on the sort of lower end of the scale. The students are the ambassadors are providing information, they're sharing their experience and so on. But that sort of transactional interaction does very little in terms of generating community, because sometimes these students, what they're looking for is connection. They're looking for, they want to feel part of something. They want to be recognized, and your ambassadors can play a much greater role in that. We're encouraging ambassadors to engage in kind of higher level activities that now they won't do it without some structure and with some help, but that sort of higher level activity will help those students become integrated members of your community. So only answering questions sometimes it limits the potential value that your ambassadors can provide. And there is an opportunity there for your ambassadors with the right tools and with the right skill set to actually understand how they can support these students, not solely by answering questions, but also as community builders. So moving from utility to unity, moving from transactional exchanges to more transformational experiences and we'll look at those in a bit more detail. It does require them to be, a Q&A is more of a reactive scenario, question answer. Proactivity involves looking at opportunities to bring people together, looking at opportunities to find groups and to find ways that students can engage. So with that question in mind, I'm going to pass across to Dan for the breakout task.
Thanks, Declan. Yep. So we've spent a little bit of time there establishing why you would bother to put your time, energy, and resources into building pre-enrollment communities. And I think the evidence is fairly strong that pre-enrollment communities do deliver on a whole variety of metrics, including conversion, but not limited to that. We're looking at making connections. Declan used the word transformational there, and that's really important. We're trying to build friendships, help people to make relationships and have friendship groups and support networks in place, sometimes months before they actually meet one another on a face-to-face basis. So that delivers on a kind of personal level as well as a institutional level. However, it's not easy to do this, and it takes quite a bit of integrating into your admissions and recruitment processes. So what we'd like to do first is just to kind of take a little bit of a temp check and have a look at what the status quo is right now in the institutions where you work. So you've got a breakout task coming. You're going to be put into breakout rooms with 3 or 4 others, hopefully from other institutions. And we'd like you just to discuss how effectively currently do your ambassadors work at this generating and maintaining applicant communities goal. Is it part of your discussions with them? Is it part of the training that you have with your ambassadors? Is it mentioned at all, or are you kind of happy at the moment for ambassadors to be information givers, waiting for questions and responding to those questions? So a little bit of a discussion around that ambassador role within communities. We're going to have 10 to 12 minutes for this. You'll see the clock ticking down, so you'll be aware of how long you've got left. We'd like one person to feedback at the end of that time, so we can share the good practice around everybody that's on the call. And just another thing to note, every breakout room is going to be named after a university mascot in the tradition of light CampusConnect quizzes that we've had on these workshops already. So have a look at the name of your breakout room and see if you can guess without Googling what university has that mascot. Okay, breakout rooms are going to open now, so we'll see you back here in 10 to 12 minutes.
All right, everyone is in rooms.
Fab.
Oh, yes.
Just give it a minute as everybody comes back over. Hopefully you've had interesting and valuable discussions in the breakout rooms. Okay, that's it. I think everybody's back over. So welcome back. So 12 minutes, hopefully that was enough time to get through a bit of interesting and practical type discussion around your ambassador usage at your institution. So we're going to have a bit of feedback and a time for a discussion now. I'm going to say the name of the room, and we'd like somebody from that room then to just summarize a little bit about what you spoke about. And I'm going to start with Wolfie. I don't know if you guys know who you are.
Hello, that's me. Hello.
Okay, excellent. Brilliant.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm James from the University of Brighton. So yeah, there were 4 in our group, and we had somebody from Birkbeck, and I can't remember the others, Middlesex and somewhere else. So yeah, we sort of just discussed the kind of reason a lot of us are here is we sort of felt a little bit limited about what our ambassadors are doing, but we all sort of use ambassadors in quite a similar way. So namely for projects on campus, so all the obvious stuff like open days, campus visits, those sorts of things. And then also through sort of external projects. So at the University of Brighton, we have quite a developed outreach program. So we use our ambassadors with local schools and colleges, and also have kind of academic workshops where we invite students onto campus, and all of that is kind of tied into the ambassador expertise and experience. So we use our ambassadors to kind of facilitate that, and also other projects like mentoring. I think a common thing that we discussed was the platform was UniBuddy. So I think all 4 of our institutions use that to sort of varying degrees. So generally for things like online events, but also the kind of community function where you can connect ambassadors to current students. So yeah, so we all kind of use that to some more than others. For example, us at the University of Brighton, we kind of connect our uni buddies to offer holders within that particular subject. So we kind of use it as like an introduction tool and a bit of a conversion tool as well. So yes, and I think what we also mentioned was we do have a little bit of presence on the student room as well, but more like a passive engagement with that. Yeah, just as a kind of monitoring, trying to kind of, as I said, take a bit of a passive role. But yeah, other than that, I think those were the only sort of 2 platforms we used really. And that's about all we discussed.
Fab, thanks James, it's really interesting. And did you mention whether or not community building or connecting applicants, is that kind of an active thing that you promote with your ambassadors, or is it more making sure they have the information they need to pass on type stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we do particularly proactively. Again, it's something that we're sort of exploring, I think, at the moment. I can only speak for the University of Brighton myself, but yeah, we're kind of just starting that idea about connecting students, but then, yeah, just encouraging that and using, there is a function, I think, on UniBuddy, the communities function, which we're trying to sort of perhaps move people away from Facebook to engage with that. So yeah, but still feel a little bit in the dark about how we can capitalize on that and improve that.
Great, thank you very much. That's really interesting. And did you guys know where Wolfie was based?
No, we sort of had a little bit of a discussion. I think in the end we went for Exeter. I don't know about Wolves on Dartmoor.
Oh yeah, I like your thinking. Yeah,
we
makes
kind of
sense.
went down that route, but yeah, a bit of a shot in the dark, really.
It's the University of Limerick.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but yes, don't know what the link is with Wolves. There's probably someone from UL on the call to tell us. But there we go. Thank you very much. Excellent. It's really interesting feedback. We'll move on next to Kevin, and I can't pronounce that. Is it Isthiostega? Don't know if I'm saying that right, but in that group we are Jigna K, Nicole, and Richard. Nicola, sorry, and Richard. If you guys want to jump in.
I'll jump in there, guys.
Thanks, Kate.
So just to clear up the question about Wolfie,
Oh, yes.
you're from the University of Limerick. UL Wolves would be sort of the pack for our students. Their students belong to the pack of UL Wolves. So Wolfie, I would like to just very proudly announce, was the #1 mascot of all of the universities, I believe, in 2022. I absolutely voted for him, of course, myself. Within our group, guys, we were talking about, in particular, the recruitment of our ambassadors that came up. And we were talking about, being able to, from meeting with students, identify who's the chatty one, who's the confident one, who could carry out and hold good conversation. So resourcing your ambassador team properly is hugely important. Similar to what James mentioned, we in our side of the house are only really looking at, equipping the ambassadors this year with the confidence and the ability to be able to be proactive in engaging in terms of, other than a Q&A session, giving students answers to questions. I know that within our counterparts in UL Global, they are very heavily active in that format, in that they do, I believe, live Instagram videos and things like that. And that's certainly something that we would be looking to echo. So if anybody else from our team, from Kevin, the itchy, I don't know how to pronounce it, so maybe somebody else will know how to. But I cheated, I'll be very honest, and I Googled because I was curious.
Yeah.
I believe it's Reading. So if anybody from Reading wants to enlighten us as to what that is, it'd be great.
Very big of you to admit that you Googled that, okay?
Oh,
didn't try and claim it.
Like that.
Excellent. No, that's really interesting around that resourcing question, because I think that's the biggest thing, isn't it? Do we pay our ambassadors? How do we recruit the ambassadors? How do we know who's going to be a good ambassador? I think we'll get into it a little bit after this part of the session when Adele is going to contribute to the session, our community manager. But I think a big thing is not every ambassador you recruit will be good at the role. And it's really hard to filter out who's good and who isn't. But you do discover it fairly quickly, I think. And the ones that are good, it's really is quality over quantity that matters. And some people are naturally good at that, bringing people together and trying to spot connections that will be powerful and people who will get on with each other, etc. So that's really good to hear. We'll move on. And next I've got on my list, Steve the Stag. And in that group, there was Claire, Isaac and Jessica. From you guys want to just feedback, that'd be really good.
Hello. I'm Isaac from the University of Derby. I work in the schools and colleges liaison team, so pretty much a lot of my work is ambassador focused at the moment. We kind of discuss like the different roles between what our ambassadors play, and it seemed like across the board that we use them on digital platforms, but in like varying respects. So I know here at Derby, we've made kind of a move away from doing online events and online like open days and that sort of stuff. But the other universities still running that, still finding it really successful, and having like digital ambassadors assigned for certain roles like that. So as I say, encouraging communication, connections between like ambassadors and applicants. We at Derby have kind of taken away that online element, just still using Unibuddy, but again, it's just for those conversations, it's just providing those answers to questions. And I don't know whether we've made it a bit too rigid in the answers that they are meant to be given, and they lack a bit of creativity. It seems like whenever we get an ambassador kind of asking us, what do I say here? They're kind of just following a script that we've given them. So as I said, I don't know whether we need to just make it a bit more creative, a bit more engaging, just to build those communities. But the other universities, they use them in different respects. So like I say, they would have digital ambassadors who would be responsible for filming, content, promotion, that sort of stuff as well. So it's quite interesting to see what the other ones are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that being able to have ambassadors that specialize is a bit of a luxury, but that must be really nice to say your role is in digital, your role is open day related, or whatever it might be. Rather than trying to get one ambassador to do a bit of everything, which is often the case, I think. That's really interesting. In terms of payment, how do your university go about it, Isaac, if you don't mind sharing? Do you tend to pay, or do you have other kind of related schemes?
They are still, if they're doing like a Unibuddy platform, they are paid. So even if they do like 1 minute, I believe they get paid 25 minutes worth of work. So it just gets rounded up. So it's quite good for them. But that's how we kind of do it. We just do it in those minute increments and just level it up.
Yeah, very interesting. Something our clients have fed back over the last couple of years is they want more insight. What are our ambassadors doing? How long are they spending? Who are they connecting with, etc. So I think that's all related to remunerating them for the work they do. Excellent. And you were, remind me, you with Steve the Stag. Any idea?
We didn't get around to answering that one, but I'm intrigued to find out.
University of Surrey. Apparently. So there you go. Don't know if we've got anyone from Uni Surrey on the call, but they'll tell us why, I'm sure, if they are. Okay, we'll move on. We've got another sort of 5 minutes or so in this part. So next we'll come to Professor Puzzles. And in that group we had Amy, Andrea, Carly and Megan.
Happy to talk. We're all from sort of different areas of the university, and it was apparent that we didn't necessarily know what all teams in the university were using student ambassadors for. I think two main things we sort of came to were that international or global teams use student ambassadors to build communities perhaps in a better way, or just different to UK applicant sort of activities. So perhaps more, I don't know, research to be done there and how that works and why it works better for international students than UK. But also that building connections and community from ambassadors to applicants perhaps requires a level of autonomy that we haven't quite got to with our ambassadors. And perhaps that comes down to how we resource the ambassador team and we make sure they've got the skills required. And then leaving them with that responsibility to be able to forge those connections themselves. And a bit like with, do we give them a script or do we just give them the basic knowledge and skills to do that themselves? It's kind of having that trust in them that they do know what they're doing and how they can build those connections themselves. And I don't think we knew what we didn't know the mascot.
Yeah, just looking at that scale between kind of scripted, controllable aspect versus freedom and allowing them just to act as they see fit is a really interesting question. And I think that lots of new students and applicants are looking for authenticity, and they wouldn't like to think they're being given a scripted response, and they can probably see through it as well. But then for the uni, it's quite a difficult question, isn't it, to relinquish that control and allow people just to go and act as they see fit. So I wonder if we'll probably get into this a little bit after, but Adele certainly would have an opinion on this in terms of the work that we're doing with our clients, I guess. And it's probably one of those that there's not really a right and wrong answer. It's more just on a scale. So thanks for raising that, Amy. Professor Puzzles is from Bournemouth University. There we go. And we've got time, I think, just for one more. So let's come to Frankie the Phoenix. That room had Kirsty, Lewis, Morgan, and Summerthy.
I'll go and speak for Frankie. So we were just discussing that our ambassadors, a bit like everybody else, has the same sort of role of Unibuddy, campus tours, out and events, open days, campus tours, things like that. We also discussed taking ambassadors out to do sort of presentations and talks with prospective students, whether that was high school age, college age, mature students. Some of us were starting to do that. Some of us are maybe hoping to start to do that to try and build a bit more of a community. But at UWS, where I work specifically, we don't quite as much have a focus on that, building sort of connections with the pre-applicants especially. The ambassadors are just mostly there for any help that we require of them, and that was the same across the board for the other institutions as well.
Interesting. And are there plans, Kirsty, do you think it's worth trying to update their role toward
I absolutely do. Yeah, that was the one thing I was saying specifically for my institution, was that we were struggling with retaining ambassadors because there wasn't enough for them to do, although they do get paid, and it's quite a good rate of pay that they get. Even with what we were doing, it just still wasn't enough to keep them all interested, especially when the ambassadors are split across campuses, and the different campuses had different number of events or that type of thing. So we were absolutely planning on having an overhaul and a rethink about how we're doing the ambassador programme, which is, I suppose, why I joined the session today to get some ideas.
No, fab. Hopefully you'll get some takeaways you can bring to that meeting in that case. Excellent, thank you very much. And Kirsty, I'm guessing you know where Frankie the Phoenix is from.
No, I have no idea. Not a clue.
It's your uni.
Is it?
Are you from UWS? Apparently, Frankie the Phoenix is the University of Western Scotland.
Is it? There we go.
So there we go.
It was a Scotty dog, but we'll take Frankie the Phoenix.
I'll double check that. Maybe my info is wrong. But,
oh well, you learn something new every day.
There we go. All right, lovely. No, that's great.
Thank you.
You need to check your sources, Dan.
I'll check my sources. Yeah, I will do. Very good, though. Really interesting. And those questions that are coming out of it are ones we hear fairly commonly from clients in the sector as well. How authentic should they be? How do you resource it? Should you have specialist ambassadors? How do you pay them? How do you track their behaviour? What does success look like? All of those things that need to be established before the recruitment cycle, really, to make the most of the huge opportunity that that ambassadors can have such a fantastic impact on your recruitment. So we're going to look at a few practical aspects of your ambassador contributions to community creation. These are taken from the work we're doing with our current clients, and I think Declan is going to give our community manager Adele a bit of a grilling to interview her about how our approach is working. So I'll hand back over now.
She's going to put the spotlight on Adele now.
No pressure.
Just from the feedback, I thought the comment about sort of the level of autonomy is quite interesting. I think that's a struggle. Like, how much freedom do you give ambassadors, or and how scripted? So we can actually cover some of that here as well. So we're going to start with just let me just everyone can see that. Yeah. So with 5 examples here that. Now, there are other types of activity that we encourage ambassadors to get involved in, but these are kind of 5 fairly straightforward and hopefully ones that you could apply. Let me just minimize that. Okay, so the scenario here is an online group of students, an ongoing online group of applicants, and they've, for some universities, these can be very, very large. You can have thousands of applicants in, Facebook group, or we mentioned sort of the different WhatsApp groups. Now, at the outset, I mentioned that, from the work we've done with partners talking to applicants, this community is often the first meaningful interaction that they have with your university. And as unscalable as it sounds, your ambassadors can be proactively welcoming new members. And that's something that we encourage across the board. If I'm an incoming student and I'm considering, I'm making this transition, being welcomed into this community is so important in terms of that experience. Now, Adele works with teams. Adele's position in terms of as a community manager is each institution that we work with, Adele works with the various teams and also supports the ambassador program. So I suppose, Adele, how is this implemented is kind of probably what people are thinking. How do you actually get this working?
Yeah, I think having a template in place for the ambassadors when you're holding your onboarding workshops is quite important. And actually, like outsetting this from the beginning, just making them know how important it is to welcome the incoming applicants into the community. As I said, Declan, like your ambassadors are going to champion your university's experience, and often they're that first kind of point of contact with your university. So we really want them all to know that this is a safe and happy community where they can contribute to. And I know you might be thinking, I might have 200 people in this community, how are they going to personally welcome each member? They can't, like batch welcoming does always work as well. Just someone there, just so the students know that there is someone there on hand to, that they can get in touch with, and just especially having like open-ended questions or things like that at the end of this example, like why not introduce yourself into the community, giving the students that bit of a nudge and a bit of a prompt in ways that they can engage, and just opening up that dialogue is really important.
As we go along, please feel free just to add to the chat, and we'll pick up a few questions on this sort of approach, and it obviously depends as well on what platform you're using. How I noticed in the comments as well, someone mentioned about being quite limited in terms of what they can do with their ambassadors. So this does require ambassadors to be quite proactive and looking for new members as they come in. We do see some examples too where they all jump in if there's new members, but that's also not a problem. I think it's better than you might see 2 or 3 ambassadors sort of welcoming the same student, but again, there isn't an issue in that. The templates sometimes change, I think, per university.
Yeah, they can. But I think something just to mention as well, sometimes a nudge from a staff member, like whether it's like an ambassador manager or if someone like in my role as community manager, just to be able to nudge the ambassadors, just to remind them to keep doing this proactively. And I think as Dan mentioned before, some ambassadors would be really, really fantastic at this from the outset. Some might need a little bit more encouragement. But once they start doing it, and also I think when one ambassador leads by example, then as Declan said, some of them will all start jumping in. But this is fine, it just means there's more people there to welcome them, and that's what the message we really want to get across to the new users when they join your community.
Yeah, so a big one, new community online for these students. I think a personal welcome from one of your ambassadors makes a huge difference in that sort of, welcome to this community, welcome, you're a valued member. And the next part, which often gets overlooked, we welcome people in, but when a new student comes into this community, they often just don't know what they're supposed to do. So there's a group here, what happens next? And we've often seen that ourselves, where you're in groups that, there isn't that much engagement because people aren't really sure what they're supposed to do or how they're supposed to participate. And one thing that your ambassadors can do that's really, really helpful is to actually show students, sort of prompt them in terms of what they need to do next to engage, how they can sort of start the conversation. Adele, what's the typical sort of cues here?
Yeah, I think once again, of course, it is very important to have this in your onboarding, and for the ambassadors to recognize this. I find having weekly prompts, when I see there Kay has mentioned in the chat of having an ambassador support group within your community is really important. A place where you could have staff members and your ambassadors can communicate. Jumping in there with little prompts and different icebreakers and ways that they can open up the dialogue with the students is really important. I think a lot of the time as well, ambassadors can get caught up in and the students as well. I think this is, very university, I can only ask questions and discuss things related to course or accommodation. But really, in finding these unique and personal ways that they can interact with each other will really start to make them feel at ease and make the ambassadors are human, and often they can be similar age to them. So we really want them to feel like they can talk to them just about normal things. Some of the prompts I'd like to share is, what are you watching on Netflix now, or what are your hobbies and things like that. So once that dialogue is open, then they're more likely to actually come with, when they do have questions about their course, or more university directly related queries as well. They're champion your community, and you want to put your best foot forward, showing that your university has a really strong and really engaged and exciting community. So just I think that's always just something to reiterate, and to keep reiterating to your ambassadors. Sometimes they do forget, so that's important as well, just to remind them of that.
Yeah, I think sometimes ambassadors don't often recognize the value of some of these activities.
That's the thing. I think that a lot of them are very conditioned to that question and answer and only certain questions. And like a lot of from the feedback we've got from the breakout rooms, a lot of them are feeling like they're just reading off a script and this is what I have to say, but really they can make it their own and kind of customize the role and play to their strengths, talk about what they enjoy talking about. I think that really helps.
Yeah, very good. So number 2 is showing new members how to participate. So making sure that when the students join the community, they're in groups, what do they, what are they supposed to do? So they understand there's an expectation and, this is how you participate. And sometimes the ambassadors can kind of model that and show that. So the next one we have is possibly the most important one, which is guide valuable peer connections. Now, this one is a higher level kind of activity, but your ambassador's role is, again, moving away from just that Q&A. And sometimes the students are just asking questions because they're asking questions, but really what they're looking for is connection. So when a student joins a CampusConnect community, what we try and do is make sure that they're being connected. So prompt the ambassadors to check, has this student found their group and have they found connections? How does this one work, Adele, on a practical level? How do you find, you mentioned, I think this is probably one that sometimes ambassadors need more support and training to do.
Yeah, this one can be difficult and it can be difficult for them to pick up from the outset. And I think it is that kind of encouragement from the university just to encourage the ambassadors to be proactive. We do talk a lot about being proactive rather than reactive. We're just getting them to actually reach out and not just waiting. Like if the ambassadors are waiting for someone to come and say, oh, I haven't found someone for my course, how can I do that? Then they've already lost a lot of the value that they could have had from the community from the outset. So being proactive and seeing like, oh, I know this person is studying like mechanical engineering and I know this other person is, I can link them up together and actively asking them who would they like to connect with, if it's people from the same country, same accommodation, different things like that, is really, really good. But definitely I think this one can be a little bit more difficult to get the ambassadors to do. Some of them fly it at the beginning with it, and some might not take to it as quickly, but through encouragement, from yourselves will be really, really helpful.
I know from speaking to teams as well, this is something that sometimes university staff themselves would have a go-to kind of list of connections, and they would try to try and broker kind of the best connections for students. How do the ambassadors know who to connect, or how do they sort of?
Yeah, often, I suppose in my role, I would share, students I'd like them to connect with. Sometimes you can, denote some students that might not have as many connections, with their own platform with CampusConnect through analytics, things like that. We can have a look at that and kind of pick out them kind of students that might need a little bit more help or extra attention. And also as well, you can see from people how they're interacting in groups. A lot of the time, if people are calling out in groups for certain people, that means they haven't found certain people. So as long as the ambassadors really need to be proactive in noticing these kind of things and then getting in contact with the student, often via direct message, I think is the easiest way than maybe, calling them out in different groups like that, and just being able to provide them with these connections. But preempting it before they actually have to ask for it is really, really vital. And this can be something that just takes them a little bit more time to get to grips with.
And there's tremendous, like we've seen from the feedback and the testimonials of the student, there's tremendous value in this for students. They get so much value. If this university is taking the time to find people for me to connect with, the experience and we've seen that the feedback has always been very, very positive. This is something that they really value.
Yeah, because the student will feel so valued. Then it's like, wow, you really took the time out to help me, like actually find someone I'm going to be living with and things like that. It's a great first impression, definitely, of your university.
Okay, super. I think there's some questions, Dan. Is there any? No.
we're sort of covering them off in the chat as we go, but there was a question around that higher level support group, which I think is something that we have found to be really key to a successful community.
That escalation kind of channel to help support the ambassadors.
Yeah, and a question around which platform's best. I think we would probably advise looking for a platform where they already are, if possible. Somebody's mentioned Teams as a good option for that potentially as well.
Okay. So number 4. So checking in with low active members. So in a community, and we mentioned that sort of curve, that commitment curve, where you have the students come in, there's often a lot of passive members, you know, the lurkers, people who aren't actively engaging. And then at the top end, you've got your, you know, your power users, those that are driving a lot of engagement. So in any community, that's standard. Not everybody is going to be, you know, engaged at any given time. But what we want to do as community builders is to move people up that curve and to ensure that we're picking up those who perhaps haven't engaged. This is a big part of the community process, Adele. How does this work? Be worth sort of sharing?
Yeah, again, this is the ambassadors being proactive and actually noticing in the community who hasn't contributed into a while. Some people might, you know, you might be able to see people who've joined but who haven't actually contributed at all. But really reaching out to them, direct message again, I think is the best way to do this. And just something simple, like I want you to check in, make sure you have everything you need. Often, sometimes students might be a little bit more reluctant to actually ask for help. And so they do need someone to open up that dialogue and for them to be just like know that this is a person who can help them. But once then the ambassadors do open up that dialogue, then students might have loads of questions that they might have just been a bit more reluctant to, because they might not have known where to ask or who to ask or how to approach it. In my role then as well, I would be actively checking for this, and again with our analytics on CampusConnect, we can see when people haven't been active in a while, and then I share this with the ambassadors that we work with. But I think for themselves, they should, if they're doing their job quite well, will be able to notice who might not be contributing as much as they could be and getting the most value out of the community.
Yeah, super, very good. Like we've seen, anytime there's, like, this is done frequent, like it's almost like scheduled. It's something that we do on a regular basis with partners. So you're checking the sort of engagement, and then we'd see an increase then in activity from that.
Yeah, I think at least weekly or bi-weekly, I think it is good. And then having that escalation group, things like that for staff members, if you're doing this with your ambassadors, I think that's a really good place to make them aware of this. And just once again, giving them that encouragement, and to empower them and to know that this is something they should be doing on a continuous basis.
I think we mentioned before that we were talking about sort of how the ambassadors are like the your eyes and ears of the community. So through that escalation channel, the ambassadors can actively spot, they can see opportunities maybe where there's a group here that's really struggling, the engineering group, there's not much engagement and so on. That's we see a lot. I think you see a lot of that. Yeah,
I do see a lot of that. In particular as well, like some ambassadors, might be really, really good and really great, but as you said, like maybe an engineering group where they might not be able to contribute to as much because maybe that's not their course. Having an ambassadors group like that is great, so they can say, someone else who's an ambassador who might be more like who might be doing that course will be able to go in and contribute more and help out more that way. But it's really a good place where they can help each other and kind of get ideas from each other, and then also as well for the university, if you have anything you'd like to ask them to share it with students and things like that, or any extra ways you'd like to get them to engage, it's just really useful to have that space there.
And just for, I mean, how many groups and what size, and like what's the typical, what does an applicant sort of community look like?
Yeah, it does vary depending on the type of student. I think that's a question we do get from a lot of our clients. Like some students, or like say some ambassadors, generally when they start, they might be a member of a good few different groups, or what I like to tell them is to, you know, have a look through the different groups, whatever ones you'd like to contribute to. I think that would be good for you to join. Then there might be a couple they might like to hone in on a little bit more and be like a moderator. Some like applicants could have maybe 20 different groups that they're a part of. Some might be just a bit more relevant to them that they might like to contribute to a bit more. But then, like, as well, it is, you know, some ambassadors will just have particular groups that they might like to, that they would be better suited to. But definitely quality over quantity. I think a big question we get asked a lot is what's the best number of ambassadors to have? And you could have, you know, 15 and only 5 of them are really, really good. And that's okay. Yeah.
But I think we've up to 200 groups in some cases, and you know, very broad groups, and also these kind of very niche spaces where there's maybe 2 or 3 members only. That's and you know, I suppose one of the questions we get asked is how many groups is enough groups, and what's
that is, I think that the more niche groups the better. And like a lot of universities can be, or like the feedback we've gotten of people can be a little bit reluctant to open up these niche groups where there's only a couple of people, but that's where they're going to make the real connections on that personal level. I don't think there's ever too many groups personally, because there's so many different interests that people have and ways that they want to connect. Also something as well, I think you don't have to have a specific ambassador for every type of group. Because some of them, like Star Wars fans or dog fanatics or different things we have, they're just places where applicants want to connect with each other. They don't need specific monitoring. But if the ambassadors want to join them, then too, that's perfect, and contribute to them.
Very good. And just this, the last one, this is probably something that has changed over the years for CampusConnect communities. Originally, I think, you know, historically they were quite prescriptive, and you know, you'd have our country groups and our subject groups, and you know, some process groups. But we saw opportunities then really to bring students together in other areas, and we've seen that the ambassadors can actively support this as well. So and you know, last cycle in particular, we saw tremendous value in these kind of niche groups, but they were suggested, and Adele, you probably explain the process. How do we work out what groups to create, and how does that happen?
There's a couple of ways we've been doing this, and some of them come very organically, particularly as, like we mentioned, the ambassadors are our eyes and ears, so they're actively watching the community and seeing what people are talking about. Like I mentioned, we had a dog fanatics group on some deployments, and that was just from people discussing different profile pictures that they really liked about people's dogs. So then that was suggested then from the ambassadors that we should open up a group like that. Then also sometimes they actively ask, like in this example, like is there any new community groups you'd like to see, any suggestions? We've also found having things like Google Forms where students can actively go on and suggest what communities they'd like to see. But always just really letting the ambassadors know that any feedback is great, just in any way that we can improve the community. I think a lot of times ambassadors can think, oh, you know, I need to say that this is perfect and there's nothing I could change, because they maybe don't want to offend anyone, but just actively asking and encouraging that feedback is really important.
And this is something we've seen where, you know, if you have quite a static community and it doesn't change, this is a more organic process where new groups are created and the students then themselves have agency in terms of the community design. But I think particularly last cycle, the engagement then is much stronger because new groups are being opened in response to what students are looking for. And if you don't change and you leave it quite rigid, they will spin off somewhere else and start them anyway. So
exactly. I think it's really nice for the students as well to show that you as a university value their input, and you know that you're actively asking them, like how.
Super. Okay, so that's just 5 examples of the kind of activity that we encourage ambassadors to engage in, and we see these active, you know, these actually help the students find connections in community and belonging. There are others, and there's other institutions try different things, but and we will put this together and we'll send it across, and you can see your own context, maybe where you can apply some of these, which will come afterwards. So I think we're almost at the end, so I'm going to just move on to Dan. You might take us through the final piece.
Yep, no, I think we've just got a few minutes for some Q&A. So we'll just start with a question here from Claire Smith in the chat. And Adele probably well placed to answer this one. It's around monitoring and I guess safeguarding the chats. How can that be done at scale, I guess, as well? If you've got a lot of niche groups, how can you make sure what's been discussed is relevant and appropriate?
Yeah, I think this is where that escalation group is really, really important. So as we had mentioned, your ambassadors can be really used as your eyes and ears. And we have seen in the escalation groups, if there has been any, generally there's not, which is fantastic that the communities are very positive. But if there is anything, what we always say to the like in the onboard, and I think it's really important to reiterate that to the ambassadors, that if they do notice anything, that's a good space for them to come back and just let the university know. There's other safeguarding things like on CampusConnect. We have ways that you can report messages or block users, and that all gets fed back then into admin, into the analytics, so we can then look into it further if needs be. But really just reiterating to the ambassadors that they are your eyes and ears. Also having, like in my role, I'm actively in the communities as well, and having a look and monitoring, helping the ambassadors to moderate these chats. So it is really good if you can have somebody in a position like myself to oversee that.
Yeah, we have in CampusConnect built in some sort of technical functionality around being able to flag questions or report particular comments as well. And I think most social media platforms now would have something around that. So it's making sure the setup works for you, because you want really the monitoring to be done from within the community, because you can't read every, you've got 400 groups, no one's going to read through every single comment, but you do have the ambassadors there to support. So very good. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, a couple of minutes only actually, but if anybody wants to unmute and jump in, now's your chance to ask anything you'd like to. Perhaps we've covered off everything, that's fine. We have covered off, I think, pretty much all of the questions that came up in the chat. So perhaps just a chance, Declan, just to summarise then.
Yeah, so that's it. We're almost out of time. So just to finish up, we're going to this is obviously being recorded, and we'll share it with you after the session. We'll put together a small just a worksheet with some of those kind of key activities that we mentioned that you can hopefully implement. But we hope that this has been, practical, useful. It's prompted some thought around how you can utilize your ambassadors more as community builders for September 23. And if you have any questions, please get in touch. And we're, as I mentioned at the outset, we're just thrilled with the response to these workshops. And I think it's been fantastic. It's a great testament to the recognition, I think, of how important people place community in. So thank you all for taking time, and we will hopefully catch up with you soon, and take care and have a lovely rest of the week. So thanks, everyone.